In a noisy hotel, a man angrily pulls the waiter to the top floor, gives the waiter some tips, and asks him to open the room at the end of the hallway. According to the information available to the man, his wife is dating another man. But when the door was open, he broke out in a cold sweat at what he saw. His wife and the man were both dead in bed, shot in the head, and died in a horrific state. What's going on here? What is the secret behind this murder? Hello everyone, and welcome to my movie commentary channel. What I bring to you today is Under Suspicion, which is a crime suspense film full of reversals. In the 60s of the last century, the divorce system in England was very strict, and even if the husband and wife were not in agreement, they had to provide a valid reason for divorce. As a result, a group of lawyers specializing in divorce cases came into being, and the protagonist Tony was one of them. However, his methods are extremely despicable. He will make his wife pretend to have an improper relationship with the client and photograph the so-called cheating evidence so as to help the client get a smooth divorce. That afternoon, Ratist magicians. Another customer came to visit, a man who claimed to be a salesman. Tony signs a partnership agreement with him as usual and then asks his wife to take him to the hotel. Seeing that the time was almost up, Tony took the waiter to the designated room, gave him some tips, asked him to act as an eyewitness, and took out his camera to prepare to take pictures of the two cheating. However, when the door was opened, they found that both the wife and the client had been shot dead in bed. Tony's mind went blank in an instant. He was just a little lawyer dealing with divorce cases. How could he incur murder? After receiving the report, the police rushed to the scene as soon as possible. The detective in charge of the case is an old friend of Tony's and has known about Tony's wrongdoing for many years. But he has always turned a blind eye out of affection. But now that there has been a homicide, and the victim is a prominent figure, the matter must be seriously investigated. Tony was immediately confused. The customer who was killed was nothing more than a salesman. Could this also be counted as a person with status? Seeing that he was still unaware, the police took out a newspaper. The deceased was a famous Italian painter and was very wealthy. The murderer not only killed him, but also cut off one of his thumbs. The detective speculated that the murderer was here for the painter, so he decided to investigate from the painter's life circle. A few days later, the detective and Tony attend the painter's funeral. In addition to his wife, an unexpected visitor appeared at the funeral. Angela, the painter's lover. A man is surrounded by two women competing for favor, and both of them undoubtedly have a motive for committing the crime. However, after talking to them separately, the detective found that the painter's wife was holding a party in London at the time of the crime, and at least people could testify against her. Angela also had an alibi, saying that she was with the family lawyer that night, but this reason was obviously untenable, so why did she have to deal with it late at night? If there is something else hidden between the two, could it be that they conspired to commit this murder? In order to get more clues, the detective finds the family lawyer and asks him when he went to see Angela late at night. The lawyer said that in order to divorce, the painter needed to create the illusion of interacting with others, and he went to meet Angela late at night to cooperate with this plan. The reason why I went late at night was because even if Angela wanted to stop it, it was too late. Although he was right, Tony didn't believe him at all. The painter's circle of life is small, and his wife has a conclusive alibi, so the only suspect is Angela. Out of curiosity, Tony sneaks into Angela's villa, but when he enters the house, he is knocked unconscious with a wooden stick. Angela had seen Tony once during the day, and she knew that Tony had always doubted herself. So instead of calling the police, she took Tony to the painter's study. There are many paintings in the study. After the painter's death, his works will be more precious, which is probably the motivation for Angela's murder. Angela doesn't deny that every painting here is worth more than every painting. He was worth more than. With that, at death, she threw one of the paintings into the fire. He did this only to prove that he was not greedy for money. Tony hurriedly took out the painting, Because he came from a poor background, he could not tolerate such waste. Tony then took a spin around the study. He was curious about how the paintings were authentic, and the signatures were clearly not enough to prove it. Someone can forge a painting, and they can forge a signature. Angela pointed to the corner of the painting and said that the painter would press his thumbprint at the place of signature, which is a unique sign. It dawned on Tony that it was no wonder that the killer would cut off the painter's thumb. It turned out to be this reason. During a casual conversation with Angela, Tony discovers that she doesn't seem to love painters, and even resents the relationship between the two. What's going on here? Angela said that the painter was a very remarkable person, and at first she admired him, but then things got out of control. The painter became infatuated with her and even wanted to divorce his wife. Angela told him again and again that she wanted to go back to the United States and that it was impossible to stay with him. But the painter was forced to die. Maybe it didn't happen at all. The murderer was actually the painter himself, who chose to commit suicide. Tony immediately ruled out the possibility, as both had been shot. If he committed suicide, where would the murder weapon go? The screen cuts to the police station, where the officer in charge of the investigation finds a photo from many years ago. It turns out that Tony used to be a police officer, but later resigned because he made a serious mistake and turned to a lawyer. This photo was taken when he won the shooting competition. This suggests that Tony may have had a handgun in his possession in private. When questioned, he said he had never owned a pistol. This is clearly lying. The detective came to the door and asked him why he was hiding the gun. Tony explained that he was not licensed to carry a gun, and that revealing the matter would only cause more trouble. Besides, that gun was just a souvenir, and it hadn't been used for a long time. At the detective's insistence, Tony agrees to hand over the gun, but when he rummages through the drawer, he finds that the pistol is missing. This further aggravates Tony's suspicions. Apparently, he deliberately threw away the pistol after committing the crime. The next day, the police came to Angela's home. They first inspected her red sedan and then produced a search warrant purporting a full search of her home. This makes Angela very unhappy, and she thinks that Tony must have revealed some information to the police that caused her to be suspicious. However, Tony stated that he didn't say anything, and that he himself was suspected of the handgun incident. Angela realizes that this is not the way to go, so she tells the truth. On the night of the crime, she did go to the hotel because she didn't want the painter to make the wrong decision for herself. But downstairs, she calmed down again. If you go and stop it, the painter will definitely be furious. So Angela just stayed in the car and didn't get up. No wonder the police searched her car. It turned out that someone saw a red sedan parked in front of the hotel at the time of the crime, and the car did not belong to anyone in the hotel, so the police turned their suspicion to Angela. The facts of the case are becoming more and more confusing. Who was telling the truth? What really happened that night? On the other hand, the detective finds Tony again to inquire about the situation. According to Tony, he and Angela were 10 o'clock in the evening. But according to the lawyer's wife, her husband didn't come home until midnight, and he walked for a full 2 hours on the 3-mile journey. Where did he go during this time? The private lawyer did not give an explanation, and the detective did not have enough evidence in his hands, so the matter had to be put on hold for the time being. In the evening, Angela asked Tony to go for a walk at the beach. At the time of the crime, he saw a man on the roof of the hotel, a femme hotel, but the light was too dim to see the other man's face. Angela told the police about the discovery, but no one believed her or even suspected that she had made it up. While the two were chatting, there was a sudden noise in the woods not far away, and Tony felt that someone was watching them, so he decided to go back to the villa. After spending some time together, Angela discovers Tony's humor and it to resemble each other in many ways, so she has sex with him that night. The next day, the detective takes Tony to the scene of the crime, and they want to restore the murderer's modus operandi. There are traces of bullets on the pillow, indicating that the killer used it as a silencer. but judging by the blood stains next to the bed, it seems that the killer fired the shot from the direction of the bathroom. So the question is, why didn't the deceased get out of bed after seeing the murderer? To let the murderer take the pillow? There is only one circumstance that can explain this. At least one of the two victims knows the killer and therefore lets his guard down. There is a balcony outside the bathroom, and although there is no way down the stairs, there is a ladder to the roof. Angela once said she saw a man standing on the roof. Could it be that the murderer escaped from there? The two climbed up to the roof and found a window leading to the kitchen. In the middle of the night, no one could see the killer, so it is likely that he fled from there. I just don't understand where the murder weapon went. He searched the entire hotel, but still did not find the murder weapon. Just when the two are helpless, the detective stumbles upon a chimney on the roof, which is connected to the hotel's boiler room, which is undoubtedly the ideal place to hide the murder weapon. The detective asks the workers to open the boiler and discovers that there is indeed a pistol inside, and this gun is exactly the same model as Tony's lost pistol. Although the two are good friends, and immense friends, the proof is in front of them. The detective could not tolerate this behavior either, so he decided to arrest him. Tony suddenly remembered that his office door had been pried open a few days ago, and the pistol must have been stolen at that time. Tony didn't expect the detective to believe in him, but for the sake of years of friendship, he hoped that the other party would give him 24 hours. In the afternoon of the same day, a private lawyer came to read the painter's will. There is only one sentence in the will: all his property is at Angela's disposal. The wife was furious. When the husband made the will, to husband's will, he was by his side, and the content of the will would never be like this. But she reacted quickly. Could it be that the husband changed the will in private? The lawyer nodded, and the new will was signed on December, the day she was killed. This clue undoubtedly pushed Angela to the forefront. Killing people in order to get the inheritance as soon as possible makes perfect sense. However, the detective believes that things are not that simple. The lawyer was with Angela when the painter was killed, and the murder was most likely planned by the two of them. So I'm going to be following that private lawyer for a while. That night, Tony pretends to go to Angela when Siuan, and when she falls asleep, he starts searching around. However, this scene was watched by Angela. Little did she know that Tony still didn't believe herself. To appease him, Tony claims to take him to a place and ends up in an abandoned house. This is the home of the wife's ex-husband. At the time, Tony was a police officer, and his ex-husband was planning a robbery, and Tony and the detective were in charge of keeping an eye on him. After going back and forth, Tony got along with his current wife, and the two often dated in this house. However, one day he was bumped into by his ex-husband, and he took out a shotgun and prepared to kill the two. In the process of escaping, they mistakenly killed another police officer. Tony believes it was his fault and quit his job as a police officer. Angela was very sympathetic to his plight, and her previous unhappiness suddenly vanished. Tony took out his lighter and lit it twice, ready to light Angela's cigarette. Angela, who saw this scene, had a frightened expression, and she drove away without saying anything. On the other hand, the detective follows a private lawyer to a hotel, and when he kicks the door open, the scene inside makes him laugh and cry. It turned out that the lawyer was a middle-aged man who went out late at night to have a secret meeting with his young lover. Although it is different from the detective's guess. According to the law at the time, the lawyer's behavior still violated the law. After returning to the police station, the detective asked him to confess the truth. Was the murder in the inn planned by him and Angela? The lawyer did not answer his question directly, saying only that he would never go to jail. Just then, as protest magicians, Tony suddenly called, and it seemed that something very urgent had happened. There was no way. He could only rush over for the time being. It turned out that because of the killing of his colleague back then, some people in the police station have always hated him. Seeing that he was back at the scene of the crime, These people couldn't help but beat him up. The detective didn't care about his injuries. It is likely that the private lawyer knew what was going on, and it was imperative to get his confession, and the two immediately went to the lawyer's office. Just now, the detective asked him to go back and prepare the materials. However, as soon as they opened the door, they saw that the lawyer had committed suicide. He couldn't stand the exposure of his secrets, so he chose this way to end his life. I thought that everything would be wasted, but I didn't expect the lawyer to leave a note before he died, which said that Angela had nothing to do with the case and that the real murderer was Tony. With this note, the detective could no longer hide it and sent Tony to court in accordance with the judicial process. The first witness brought by the prosecution was a car salesman. A few years ago, Tony bought a car in his shop, and the two had a good relationship at the time and often chatted together. Tony had mentioned that he was interested in his wife's ex-husband because he had money, but later learned that the man had been sentenced to death by hanging for shooting a police officer. Tony originally thought that his wife would bring a lot of property to marry him, but he didn't expect that her ex-husband was already in debt and even mortgaged his house. Tony ends up getting nothing, so he doesn't love his wife at all, and maybe even harbors hatred. Immediately afterward, the prosecution's lawyer Tony's pistol, which the medical examiner has confirmed to be the murder weapon. The prosecution wanted to ask how his pistol could have been at the scene of the crime. Tony claims that his office was burglarized and that the pistol was lost at that time. Verbal statements are unsubstantiated, he had debauched magicians, and evidence is needed. The prosecution's lawyer asked Tony to provide evidence, and Tony said that one client had witnessed the theft, but that client was a senior lawyer and would not testify in court. In addition, the door of the office showed signs of being prying. When he said this, Tony himself had no confidence. He knew that if he continued like this, his crime would be confirmed. So, during the intermission, Tony handed the detective a note requesting that the senior lawyer be called to testify. The client approached Tony for a divorce case. The lawyer feared that appearing in court would ruin his reputation, but the detective gave him no chance to excuse himself. If the lawyer refuses to testify, I will expose his scandal publicly in front of his friends. In desperation, the lawyer had no choice but to come to court. That day, he was about to go to the office with Tony to sign a contract, only to find a broken door that was clearly broken when he arrived at the door. Tony walked around the room and noticed that nothing was missing, so he didn't pay much attention to it. The senior lawyer's testimony gave Tony a glimmer of relief, but he didn't have time to rejoice. The prosecution brought in Angela as a witness, and her testimony pushed Tony into the abyss. On the night of the crime, Angela saw a man climb onto the roof of the hotel, where he smoked a cigarette and returned to the hotel through the kitchen window. Although his face was not clearly visible, the man had a unique way of lighting a cigarette. His lighter doesn't seem to work very well, so he will shake it twice before lighting his cigarette. At first, Angela didn't pay much attention to it until she noticed that Tony had the same way of lighting a cigarette. She later confirmed that the man was Tony. At this time, the human and physical evidence are complete. The judge convicted Tony of murder and sentenced him to be hanged immediately, to be executed early the next morning. Immediately after the trial, Angela bought a one-way ticket back to the United States. Intuition tells the detective that there must be something wrong with the woman, but time is of the essence and he simply has no chance to find evidence. Tony begs the detective to look at Angela's study, and every time the detective goes there, he gets angry. There must be some secret hidden in that room, and the detective doesn't want to see his old friend wrong, so he agrees to Tony's request. By the time the detective arrived at the villa, Angela had already packed her bags and left, and even if evidence was found, she had already returned to the United States. So the detective called his colleagues at the airport and asked them to delay Angela's boarding as long as possible. The study was originally small, but Angela packed all her belongings before leaving, which made the search very difficult. To daunting, the detective suddenly finds a severed finger in Angela's vanity case, and it's no wonder she stops herself from opening the box every time. It turned out that he had hidden his severed finger here. The detective immediately drove to the execution site. Just as Tony was about to be hanged, the detective rushed and unrescued him. The severed finger was the most important piece of evidence, and Angela was sentenced to life in prison for it. Despite Tony's clearance, he remained in detention for 6 months for filing a divorce case. After his release, Tony visits Angela in prison. In this time, Angela has found out all the truth. That night, Tony didn't go to the study to look for evidence, but to plant the sham, and the severed finger was put in the vanity box at that time. After he was sentenced, the painter's wife became the biggest beneficiary. Tony must have made a deal with the painter's wife at such a big risk to frame himself. When those paintings are sold, they all become millionaires. From the date Tony approached himself, the plan was put into effect. Although he had already guessed the truth, he still wanted to hear Tony admit it himself. After all, the two had a happy time, and it was hard for him to trust him to be so scheming. Tony walked slowly over to Angela, but didn't say a word. At the end of the film, although Tony has a makeover, he's not happy at all. For the sake of money, he abandoned his conscience. For the sake of money, he personally sent to women he loved to hell. Money is the greatest evil in the world. That's the end of it. Under Suspicion was released and unstarred the famous Irish actor Liam Neeson. I believe everyone is no stranger to him. He has starred in a number of films with the theme of rescue. Despite the uneven quality of the films, Liam Neeson's acting skills are definitely commendable. Of course, Liam Neeson also has many well-known films, such as Schindler's List and The Dark Knight Rises. And this film is one of Liam Neeson's early works, and it is a film full of suspense. The plot of Under Suspicion is constantly reversed, and the truth is not revealed until the last moment. However, a closer look at many of the details in the film reveals that Tony is the real murderer. For example, Tony played with the gun in front of his wife, and although there were no bullets in the gun, he still shot at her. This is actually implying that Tony is the real murderer of his wife. Later, when the detective asks him to hand over the gun, Tony says that he hasn't touched a gun in a long time, which is obviously lying. On top of that, Tony's play with the gun takes place after the office door is pried open, suggesting that his pistol was not stolen. He orchestrated it all. In addition, there is a detail that reveals Tony's motive for committing the crime. When he first met Angela, he threw a famous painting worth into the stove to prove that he was not greedy for money.
What are you trying to prove?
But Tony hurriedly pulled the painting out of the fire. In the surface, he seems to be unable to tolerate this waste. But in fact, he's worried about money. After all, half of these paintings will be owned by him in the future. Of course, there are some criticisms in the film, such as Tony's plan being too risky. If the detective had come late, would Tony have been hanged? This really exposes Tony's negligence. He placed the severed finger in Angela's vanity case and deliberately guided the detective to search the study. However, this range is already very small, and it is impossible for the detective to not find it all night. But what he didn't expect was that Angela had just left the courtroom to buy a ticket back to the United States and pack all the things in the villa. The detective searched like a headless fly, completely unaware of what he was looking for, which greatly increased the difficulty of the search. If it weren't for luck, Tony's plan would have failed long ago. Although Under Suspicion is presented in the form of a suspense film, it actually reveals the dark side of human nature. Tony completely abandoned the shackles of humanity for the sake of money. He married a woman he did not love for her husband's property. When he learned that the other party had gone bankrupt, he even ignored his wife's feelings and asked her to create a scandal with the client. Later, the world's latest magicians, he met the painter's wife, and in order to completely get rid of poverty, he even went so far as to kill his own wife and blame Angela, who had always been in love with the painter. In the end, he also put on a guilty look, which was really disgusting. In fact, poverty is not terrible. What is terrible is the loss of the courage to change the status quo and the evil human nature that arises from it. Well, while a latest magicians, that's all for today's story. If you like my commentary, please remember to like, favorite, and support me with one click. Your support is my biggest motivation.